The coat had been hanging in the back of the storage closet for 11 years. Marcus had not opened that closet in 11 years. He might have gone another 11 without it, except that his assistant had asked him, on the afternoon they were packing up the old office on the 22nd floor, whether there was anything in storage he wanted saved before the movers came through. Marcus had said no, without thinking. Then he had said wait, and walked back down the corridor himself because something pulled at him the way a half-remembered song pulls at you when you cannot name it. He found the coat on a wooden hanger near the far wall, still inside the garment bag, still carrying a faint smell of cedar. He unzipped it. He stood there for a long time. And in the left interior pocket, folded twice, was a note in handwriting he knew the way he knew his own face. He had no idea that note had been there. He had no idea what it would cost him to read it. That was a Tuesday in late October. By the time Marcus set the note down on the windowsill of his 22nd floor office and looked out at the skyline with his jaw clenched and his eyes wet, he had been a wealthy man for 9 years. His company managed a little over $400 million in contracts. He had a car, a driver, a corner office, and a second home on the water. He had people who called him Sir and meant it. He had a foundation he had named after no one in particular because the person he would have named it after was gone, and it had felt wrong to put the name on something so new and clean when the man himself had worked in something so old and worn. What Marcus did not know, standing there with the unfolded note in his hands, was that the man who had written it had spent the last 3 years of his life wondering whether Marcus had ever gotten what he needed. He had not known Marcus was watching from the skyline. He had not known there was anything to watch. Ezra Cole had run a tailor shop in the south end of the city for 31 years. The shop was on a street that had once been busy with foot traffic and was now quieter than it deserved to be, sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a hardware store that never seemed to have the right screws. The sign above the door said, E. Cole Fine Alterations and Bespoke Work, and the sign had been there since before Marcus was born. Ezra himself was 63 years old by the time Marcus came to work for him, and he moved with the careful economy of a man who had spent decades bent over a work table in narrow light. His hands were the most precise hands Marcus had ever seen. When Ezra pressed a seam, the seam stayed. When Ezra cut a length of fabric, the cut was so clean it looked like the cloth had always been that length. He did not waste motion. He did not waste words. He had a way of watching a person that made them feel they had been understood without having said much of anything. Marcus was 17 when he started working Saturdays at E. Cole Fine Alterations and Bespoke Work. His mother had arranged it. She had known Ezra for years through the church they both attended, and she had told Ezra that her son was bright but idle and needed somewhere to put his hands. Ezra had said he would try him for 4 weeks and see. Marcus had shown up that first Saturday wearing the only collared shirt he owned, slightly wrinkled, and Ezra had looked at him for a full 4 seconds before saying, "Come on inside, I'll show you where things go." It was not an especially warm welcome. But Marcus noticed that first morning that Ezra made him a cup of coffee without asking how he took it, set it next to the stool at the work table, and said nothing further about it. The coffee was exactly right. Marcus had not told him a thing about how he drank it. He had not known until much later to wonder how Ezra had known. The 4 weeks became 3 years. Marcus swept the shop floor and steamed lapels and learned to press a collar without scorching it, and learned which threads did not belong on which fabrics, and learned, slowly and without ceremony, how to take a man's measure. Ezra taught by doing. He did not lecture. He would say, "Watch this," and then he would do the thing, and then he would say, "Now you." If Marcus did it wrong, Ezra would say again, and watch with the same patient attention. If Marcus did it right, Ezra would say, "Good," and move on. That was the whole of it. The praise was in the moving on, Marcus came to understand. When Ezra moved on without comment, that meant it had been acceptable. When Ezra said good, that meant something more than acceptable. In 3 years, Ezra said good to Marcus perhaps 40 times. Marcus had counted. There was a winter afternoon when Marcus was 18 when a customer came in with a suit for alterations and spoke to Marcus as though he were furniture. The man was well dressed. He had a loud voice and a contempt for the counter between them that he wore as naturally as his wool overcoat. He told Marcus what he wanted without looking at him. He said it twice, slowly, as though Marcus might not understand. Marcus said nothing except, "Yes, sir, I'll write that up," and wrote it up precisely and correctly. When the man left, Ezra was in the back. Marcus had not known he was listening. Ezra came through the curtain a minute later and set both hands on the work table and looked at Marcus. He said, "A man who has to make himself tall by standing on someone else is not as tall as he thinks." He said it once. He went back through the curtain. Marcus thought about that sentence for the next 11 years. He thought about it on the days when the business world handed him the same treatment that customer had handed him at the counter when he was 18. He used it like a plumb line. It kept him level. He had not known Ezra was watching him through all the years of the building. He had not known Ezra tracked him. If you have ever owed a person something you are not sure how to repay, you know what those years feel like. They feel like a debt that earns interest. Not the financial kind, but the kind that gets heavier the more you succeed. Marcus had left the shop at 20 to take a full-time position at a logistics company across town. He had told Ezra he was going. Ezra had shaken his hand and said, "You know how to carry yourself now." Marcus had taken that as a send-off. He had not gone back to the shop, not because he did not think of it, but because the years stacked up the way years do, one on top of the next, and each year the gap felt slightly wider and he felt slightly less certain of his welcome. By the time Marcus had a company of his own, the gap was 11 years wide, and he had told himself more than once that he would go back. He had not gone back. He didn't know Ezra had wondered about him. He did not know what wondering about someone costs a man when that man is getting old, and the wondering has nowhere to go. The note was 12 sentences long. It was written on a piece of the pale cream paper Ezra used for pattern work, the same paper Marcus had traced templates on 100 times in the shop's back room. The handwriting was careful and even. Ezra had written it in black ink. The note said that he had found Marcus's address in the yellow pages under the company name, and he had been glad to find it because it told him his Saturday boy had done what he suspected he would do. It said that he had tucked the note into the coat because he knew Marcus would not read a letter he sent in the mail, or rather that he did not know whether Marcus would want to receive one, and this way the note would only find him when he was ready to find it. It said that Ezra was proud of him. It said that he hoped Marcus knew that the things he had learned in the shop were not about cloth. It said that the world had a way of making a person feel like they had to earn the right to take up space, and that the finest alteration a person could make was learning not to take that in. It closed with, "I am still here at the same address if you ever want a cup of coffee. Come on a Saturday. I open at 8. Marcus sat down in his chair by the window. Outside, the city was doing what it always did, moving in every direction at once, indifferent to what was happening inside on the 22nd floor. He had read the note 3 times. On the third reading, he noticed the date in the top right corner. Ezra had written the note 8 years ago. He had slipped it into the coat before Marcus had come to collect the garments, and Marcus had hung the coat in the back of the closet and never worn it again because the next 2 years had been lean years, the kind of lean years where you do not wear a fine coat, and by the time the lean years were over, the coat had been forgotten, and the closet had become a place where forgotten things lived. 8 years. The note had been in the coat for 8 years. Marcus pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes and breathed through it. He thought, I could still go. Then he thought, if Ezra is still there. Then he thought, I have to find out. He found out the next morning. He asked his assistant to look up e-coal fine alterations and bespoke work on the South End, and his assistant came back in 10 minutes and said the shop was still listed, with a phone number and the address Marcus already knew. Same street, same location, between the dry cleaner and the hardware store. Marcus said, hold my morning. Then he drove himself. He had not driven himself anywhere in 2 years. He parked half a block down and walked. The sign was still there, exactly as it had been. The same painted letters, a little more worn at the edges. The door had the same small bell above the frame. Marcus pushed it open and heard the bell, and the sound of it went somewhere very deep inside him. Ezra was at the back work table. He looked up. He was 71 now, thinner in the face, his hair fully white, but his hands were the same hands. And the way he looked at Marcus was the same way he had always looked at Marcus, the way of a man who understood what he was seeing without needing it explained. There was a long moment. Then Ezra said, You found the note. It was not a question. Marcus said, It was in the coat. I never wore the coat. Ezra said, I know. I figured you'd find it when you were meant to. He set down the pressing iron and crossed the shop slowly and put both hands on Marcus's shoulders. He said, It's good to see you, son. That was all he said. Marcus, who had managed $400 million of contracts without allowing himself more than 2 hours of visible difficulty in 9 years, stood in the doorway of a tailor shop on a quiet South End street and wept without apology. They sat together for 2 hours. Ezra made coffee. It was exactly right, the same way it had always been exactly right, and Marcus told him so, and Ezra smiled with his whole face and said, "I remember how you drink it. They talk the way people talk when the gap has been too long, and they are trying to fold it down to something manageable." Marcus told him about the company, about the early years, about the customer who had spoken to him exactly the way that customer had spoken to him at the counter when he was 18, and how he had used Ezra's sentence like a plumb line. He said it had held him level more times than he could count. Ezra listened. He did not interrupt. When Marcus finished, Ezra said, "That was your sentence. I only said it out loud." Then Marcus asked about the shop, about the years, and Ezra spoke plainly and without complaint, the way he spoke about everything. His wife had passed 6 years ago. His daughter lived 3 states away. The shop kept him, he said. The work kept him honest. He had some regulars who had been coming for 20 years and some new faces now and then. He got by. He got by. Marcus heard those 3 words the way you hear a wrong note in a familiar song. He knew the shop's margins. He had known them when he was 17. He knew that getting by meant something specific, something thin in a shop that charged fair prices on a quieter street than it deserved. He thought about the note. "I am still here at the same address. Come on a Saturday, I open at 8. Ezra had not asked for anything. The note had not asked for anything. It had offered coffee and presents, and the quiet extension of something Ezra had started when Marcus was a boy in a wrinkled collar shirt who did not know what he needed. Marcus looked at the work table, at the pattern paper stacked in the corner, at the tools hung on the pegboard in the same order they had always been. He thought about what it means to invest in someone without expecting the return to come back to you. He thought about what it costs. He did not ask Ezra what he needed. He knew better than to ask in a way that could be refused. What Marcus did was this. He came back the following Saturday, and the Saturday after that. He sat at the old stool at the end of the work table and watched Ezra work, and they talked. And sometimes they did not talk, and both were good. On the 4th Saturday, Marcus brought his company's attorney and a document he had spent 3 days writing himself, the way Ezra had taught him to do the careful work himself before handing it off to someone else. The document was a long-term services agreement that the attorney had reviewed and found standard in every legal sense, under which Marcus's company would commission custom garments for every leadership hire for the next 5 years, at a rate that would keep e-coal fine alterations and bespoke work not getting by, but stable and valued. Ezra looked at the document for a long time. He looked at Marcus. He said, "This is too much." Marcus said, "No, sir. It is exactly right." Ezra looked at the document again, and then at his hands, and then at the ceiling the way men look at the ceiling when they are deciding something about their own pride. He said, "All right." He signed it. The attorney witnessed it and left. Marcus stayed for another 2 hours and drank a second cup of coffee and did not say anything more about the document. And Ezra did not either, and that was how they both preferred it. The contract was not the whole of it. Marcus also had the shop's exterior painted that spring, discreetly, by a crew his office arranged. He had a new awning ordered in the same deep green Ezra had always used, slightly brighter than the one that had been there, and he told the crew to match the old one as closely as possible. He had the lighting inside improved, ceiling fixtures that produced the same warm spectrum, but at 3 times the intensity, because Ezra's eyes had been troubling him, and he had not said so directly, only mentioned once that the threads were harder to differentiate on winter afternoons. Marcus had noticed. He noticed the same way Ezra had always noticed him, by paying attention to what was not said. Ezra saw all of it. He did not make a ceremony of it. He said one morning, over coffee, that the light was better, and Marcus said, "I thought it might be." That was the ceremony. There is a kind of kindness that doesn't perform itself. It arrives quietly and makes itself useful and doesn't ask to be thanked. Ezra had practiced it for 31 years. Marcus had been the recipient of it when he was too young to recognize the shape of what was being given. What he received was not just the pressing and the cutting and the measuring. What he received was the evidence that a person could work with excellence in a quiet place and keep their character clean and be steady in the face of contempt, and still at the end of a long day go home with their dignity intact. He had carried that evidence through every difficult year of building the company. He had not known where it came from. He had thought it came from himself. It did come from himself. But Ezra had put it there in the shop on 100 quiet Saturdays by being exactly who he was while Marcus watched. By the time the 5-year contract renewed for the first time, Ezra's daughter had moved back to the city. She had come back the year before, partly for her own reasons, and partly, she told Marcus later, because she had noticed her father seemed lighter in the last 2 years, less alone, and she had wanted to see what had changed. She found a man who still worked every day, who still opened at 8 on Saturdays, who still made coffee that was exactly right, but who also smiled more readily and spoke of the future in a register that was different from before. She found a man who'd been found. Marcus met her at the shop on a Saturday afternoon, and she shook his hand and said, "He talks about you." Marcus said, "He taught me everything I know about how to be in a room." She looked at him carefully, the way Ezra looked at people, and said, "Yes, I think that's right." Ezra was behind the counter pretending to sort thread. He did not look up, but Marcus could see from the set of his shoulders that he was pleased. 3 years after that Saturday when Marcus found the note, the shop moved. Not because it was failing, because Marcus had found a property 4 blocks over, a ground floor space with proper light and a wider front window and a street that still had foot traffic. And Ezra had said when he saw it that it was too much, and Marcus had said, "No, sir, it is exactly right," which was the same thing he had said about the contract, and Ezra had made the same calculation about pride and then said, "All right." The new sign said, "E. Cole Fine Tailoring," same painted letters, the same green. The old work table came with the shop. Ezra would not leave it behind. He ran his hand along the surface before the movers carried it out, and Marcus, watching from the doorway, did not say anything. Some things do not need saying. The coat is in Marcus's office now. In. He had it taken out of the garment bag and hung on a proper stand near the window, where the light hits it in the morning. He wears it sometimes to the events that require it, and it fits him the way a thing made with care always fits, like it was made for the person he became and not the person he was when it was cut. The note is in a small frame on the shelf above his desk. 12 sentences in careful black ink on pale cream pattern paper. He reads it sometimes when a day has been the kind of day that makes a person wonder whether any of it is worth the cost. He reads, "A man who has to make himself tall by standing on someone else is not as tall as he thinks." And then, "The finest alteration a person can make is learning not to take that in." He reads those 2 things and he finds his level again and he gets back to work, the same way Ezra got back to work, one careful stitch at a time, making the thing last. The note had waited in the coat for 8 years. It had waited because Ezra did not leave things unfinished. He had sewn the hope of it into the lining of a garment, and he had trusted that it would find Marcus when Marcus was ready. And it had, and it did, and the rest of it followed the way it always follows when someone finally pays attention to what has been waiting for them. Ezra Cole still opens on Saturdays at 8. His daughter works the front counter now on the days he lets her. He does not always let her. Some mornings he wants the shop to himself, the quiet and the light and the hum of the machine, and the smell of cedar and pressed cloth, the 34 years of it accumulated in the walls. On those mornings, Marcus sometimes stops in before the driver takes him to the office. He does not call ahead, he just comes. And Ezra has the coffee ready. He always has the coffee ready, exactly right, because after all these years he still remembers how Marcus drinks it, and some things once learned do not leave you, and that is the whole of what this story is about. If you have ever had a person in your life who taught you something essential without making a lesson of it, you know the particular weight of what Marcus felt when he unfolded that note and read his own name in that careful handwriting. You know the weight of the years that should have been different. Tell us in the comments who that person was for you. And if this kind of story is what brings you here in the evenings, there is another one waiting for you when this one ends, about a woman who spent 6 years delivering meals to a man she thought was a stranger, and what she learned, too late and then not too late at all, about who he really was. He sits at the old stool, the one he sat at when he was 17, and Ezra works and they talk, and on the mornings when they do not talk, the silence is the kind that has earned itself over many years and costs nothing and gives everything. There is a photograph on Marcus's desk, taken at the new shop's opening. A small gathering, nothing formal, coffee and a few people who had known Ezra a long time. In it, Ezra is standing at the work table in his apron, and he is not looking at the camera. He is looking at Marcus, who is talking to someone across the room, and the expression on Ezra's face is the one Marcus had never seen when he was young, because you cannot see an expression that is directed at your back. It is the expression of a man who is satisfied with what he made, not the garments, not the pressed lapels or the cut seams. The person. Ezra made the person the same way he made everything, by doing the careful work over time and not making a fuss about it, and trusting that the effort would hold. The photograph sits next to the frame note. Marcus looks at both of them some mornings before anyone else has come into the office. He looks at them the way a person looks at the things that explain them to themselves. Ezra had been in the tailoring trade since he was 22. He had learned from his uncle, who had learned from his father, who had come north with nothing but a skill and a willingness to practice it without complaint. The shop had been Ezra's since he was 32, when his uncle retired and signed the lease over for a sum they never spoke about publicly. He had kept it clean and solvent for 3 decades on the strength of his work and his reputation, and the simple fact that people who brought a garment to Ezra Cole got it back better than they had brought it. His wife Ruth had worked the counter on weekday afternoons until she became too ill to do it comfortably, and after that she would sometimes sit in the chair near the front window and keep him company, which was its own kind of work. He had missed her every day since. He did not speak of it much. He carried it the way he carried everything, with both hands and without complaint. His daughter Nadia had her mother's way of filling a room. She was 38 when she came back to the city, and she had her father's precision and her mother's warmth, which was an effective combination. She had been working in corporate communications for 15 years, and she kept that skill set nearby in the shop, which she was not supposed to be reorganizing, but reorganized anyway, cheerfully, while Ezra watched from the corner of his eye with the expression of a man who had decided not to have a particular opinion. The arrangement worked. By the 2nd year, she was handling the commissions Marcus's company sent over, and by the 3rd year she had brought in 4 other corporate clients on her own, which Ezra acknowledged by saying, with exactly the same inflection he used with Marcus at 17, "Good." Nadia took this the way Marcus had taken it, as the fullest form of praise available in that shop, which it was. Marcus had eventually told his foundation's board the story of the coat and the note in the context of a longer conversation about what it meant to invest in people without certainty of return. He had not made it sentimental. He had told it plainly, the way the story deserved to be told, the way Ezra would have told it if he were telling it, which he would not have been, because Ezra did not tell stories about himself. The board had listened. One of the members, an older woman who had built a school supply non-profit over 20 years, had said afterward that the note sounded like exactly the kind of thing you write when you have stopped waiting for a person to find their way back and decided to trust they will. She said, "Ezra knew you were coming. He just didn't know when." Marcus had thought about that sentence the same way he had thought about Ezra's sentence at 18. He had tucked it away and used it. That is what good sentences are for. The coat still hangs in Marcus's office near the window where the morning light finds it. The lining is the same pale cream Ezra had used for the pattern paper. Marcus had noticed that the first time he unzipped the garment bag, all those years ago in the old office on the 22nd floor, that the lining was made from pattern paper fabric, the same material Ezra used for templates. He had thought it was a coincidence. He did not think it was a coincidence now. He thought it was Ezra saying without saying that every fine garment is built on a pattern, and every pattern is something you can return to when you need to remember the shape of what you are making. He thought Ezra had known he would eventually be the kind of man who needed reminding of that. He thought Ezra had built the reminder in. He had been right. Ezra had been right about most things. That was the difficulty and the gift of him. He saw what was true before it was finished becoming true, and he made his small, careful alterations, and he trusted the work. He had trusted Marcus. He had written a note on pattern paper and folded it twice and tucked it into the interior pocket of a coat, and he had waited 8 years for Marcus to be ready to find it. That kind of patience is not common. Ezra Cole was not a common man. Very few people spend 31 years doing exquisite work in a shop on a quiet street and keep their character clean all the way through and never once ask the world to notice them. Ezra had done all of that. Marcus had noticed. "Better late than not at all," Ezra had said, when Marcus apologized for the 11 years. "Just better," he had added, and let it stand at that. On the last Saturday of the month, the shop stays open until noon instead of closing at 10, and Marcus usually comes by at 11 after the morning's work is done. He brings pastries from the bakery 2 blocks over. Ezra tolerates this with the air of a man who would not request it and will not refuse it. Nadia is usually there by the time Marcus arrives, working at the counter or on the phone with a client, and the three of them occupy the shop the way a room is occupied when the people in it belong there, without fuss, without announcement, fitting into the available space as though they were made for it. The work table has been in 4 different buildings now, counting the one where Marcus first learned to press a seam, but it looks the same in every building, worn smooth along the edges where Ezra's forearms rest, the surface telling the whole story of the work in its grain. On those last Saturday mornings, if you looked through the front window of Cole Fine Tailoring, you would see an older man at the table and a younger man on the stool and a woman at the counter and coffee going, and you would not know from the outside what it had taken to get them all into that room together. You would just see the room. You would just see the warmth of it. The note stayed in the coat for 8 years because Marcus was not yet ready to find it. When he found it, he was ready. Ezra had known the coat would keep it. He had known the coat because he had made the coat, and he had made it to last, the same way he made everything, and the same way he had made Marcus in the end, without Marcus knowing he was being made. There is a sentence Ezra said on a winter afternoon when Marcus was 18, about a man standing on another man to seem tall, and Marcus has repeated that sentence privately to himself, perhaps 500 times in the years since. He has never said it aloud to another person. He has kept it the way you keep a tool that fits your hand exactly right. Not displayed, but within reach, used when the work requires it. That is the best inheritance. Not the money, not the contracts, not the new shop 4 blocks over with the better light and the same green awning. The best inheritance is the sentence that keeps you level on the days when the world wants to push you off your center. Ezra gave him that when he was 17 and too young to know he was receiving it. The coat held the note for 8 years and the note held the rest of it, and when Marcus found it, he found all of it at once, the debt he had not known how to carry, and the man who had never called it a debt, and the way back to a shop that had kept the same address and the same hours and the same smell of cedar and pressed cloth, waiting, the way all good things wait, for the person they were made for to finally come home. He came home in November the first time, and he came home in the months that followed, and he kept coming home. And the home in question was not a building, but a person. The fact of a person who had put an address in a note and trusted Marcus to find it when he was ready. That is the kind of thing a man does when he believes in what he made. Ezra believed in what he made. He had made Marcus, and Marcus had gone out and made a company and a reputation and a foundation and a life, and all of it had Ezra's seams in it, invisible and straight and holding everything together, and Marcus knew that now, and the knowing of it was the best part of everything he had built. The old office on the 22nd floor was gone by spring. The new office was on the 31st floor, 2 blocks north, with more light and a better view of the river. Marcus had the coat brought over on the first day. He hung it on the stand near the window before the furniture was in place, before the desk was set, before anyone from his team had come up to see the space. He hung it there first and stood back and looked at it, and thought about the note folded in the pocket, which was now in the frame on his shelf, which had not yet been installed because the shelf was not yet up. He thought about the woman at the foundation board meeting who had said Ezra knew you were coming. He just didn't know when. He thought about Ezra at 71, thinner in the face, white-haired, standing at the work table with the same hands and the same attention and the same coffee and the same willingness to say, "Come on inside," when the right person showed up at the door. He thought about how much it costs a person to keep a light on for 11 years when they are not sure the light is being seen. He thought, "I will not let that cost go unacknowledged." Then he straightened the coat on the stand, and he got to work. There is a kind of person who does their finest work in a place no one thinks to look, on a quiet street between a dry cleaner and a hardware store, for 31 years without a spotlight or a ceremony. There is a kind of person who teaches the most important lessons without calling them lessons, who builds something essential in another person and then lets that person carry it out the door without asking for credit. There is a kind of person who writes a note on pattern paper and folds it twice and tucks it into a coat pocket and trusts the coat to do the rest. Ezra Cole was that kind of person. He had been that kind of person for 71 years, and he would be that kind of person for however many years came after. And Marcus, who had been 17 and idle and in need of somewhere to put his hands, had been the lucky recipient of all of it. And he knew that now, which is the most anyone can ask of a story, that you finally know, that the knowing changes what comes next, that the next thing is worthy of what was given. Ezra still opens on Saturdays at 8. The coffee is still exactly right. Marcus still comes.